Welcome, everybody. This is the 100th episode of Hollywood Kitchen. I am amazed it has been going on this long, and I am so happy to be here with the wonderful Rick Greene. And today, for the 100th episode, we are going to celebrate the life, the career, and the legacy of Abbott and Costello. And we're going to talk all about Rick's brand new book right here. Yes, it is called Advertising Anarchy, Selling Bud Abbott and Lou Costello to War-Torn America. So we're going to talk about the book, and we're going to talk about Lou Costello's food. So welcome, Rick, and thank you so much. Yet again, you are a key part of Hollywood Kitchen, and you're one of the great people that I met doing all of this.
That's right.
Thank you so much.
I think this is it might be my 7th, but it's definitely my 6th Hollywood Kitchen.
But I am so darn grateful. You add so much wisdom, knowledge, insight, memorabilia. It's just an absolute joy every time.
And if I can't remember, I just make it up.
All right. Well done. Well done. Well, we have kind of an interesting turn of events this week because, all right, the recipe that I selected for this was Lou Costello's apple griddlecakes. It comes from a 1949 cookbook called What Cooks Hollywood.
And in the listing, it specifically calls out Abbott and Costello Meet the Killer, Boris Karloff. So that's the era that this publication is from.
Yes, and you posted all over social media. Thank you. And so much so that the post caught the attention of Lou Costello's daughter, Chris Costello. She wrote a great book about him called Lou's on First, which I read a long time ago. And she posted and reached out to me and said, Carrie, I saw the recipe that Rick and you posted. It is not legit. Lou never, ever made apple griddle cakes. He didn't cook. And by the way, that's not even his signature in the cookbook at all. And I said, fair enough. I mean, and one of the things I've kind of gotten from people, they say, oh, you know, they didn't make this stuff. Why are you doing this, Carrie? And I say, well, okay, we know Joan Crawford, Marlene Dietrich, Vincent Price. There are some of them that we know because I have talked to their families and I have eyewitness confirmation. However, a lot of them, you can't make a zillion movies a year and do the volume of work many of them do and still make food. I get it. But my attitude is that even if it is not remotely what they ate or made, it's a fun jumping off point to talk about who they were, how they lived, and kind of a way to humanize these icons. So to me, I stand by the fact that it's still a lot of fun, and why not? So
the publicists handled a lot of this, and they didn't even see half the material that went out under their own names. There's in one of the press books that I have, it talks about how Bud and Lou met their wives when the two gals were fighting backstage during a show, and the two of them pulled the gals apart, and they ended up marrying both of them. Well, both Bud and Lou were married before they even met. So some of this stuff's just made up to get into print and keep the names in front of America.
yes, it's basically kind of like a game of Mad Libs in some cases. Let's just insert the name, insert the recipe, insert whatever. But Lou's daughter, we did correspond, and there's a couple of good things that have come out of this. First off, she's very nice. And also, she told me that Lou loves sweets, in particular candy bars. That was his big thing. And Rick and I might try this. She also said one of Lou's things was to take a piece of bread, put it on a fork, and cook it over an open flame. And that was how he liked to make toast. And she said that if you try that, you'll never use your toaster again. And also, she told me that there is a Costello family Thanksgiving stuffing recipe. And she said Lou was so in love with this stuffing, it was the only stuffing he would ever eat. So I'm thinking Thanksgiving episode. That's already planned now. And that we can promote your book for the holidays. So I think everybody wins here is the point.
Well, and we need to anyways, because the publication date for Advertising Anarchy was yesterday. I don't even have a copy of it yet, so I can't hold it up. I'll hold up the Martin and Lewis book, which is the first in this advertising series or marketing series. So you'll get an idea, and I have some of the pages, but yeah, we don't even have a copy to hold up yet. I probably won't even get that for a couple of weeks.
But Thanksgiving episode, we will.
Yep.
And also, I've previously done Catherine Grayson's Thanksgiving stuffing, which came directly from her granddaughter as a recipe. Marilyn Monroe stuffing, Tyrone Power stuffing. It was kind of fun to see how the stuffings vary from star to star.
So Chris Costello, if you're watching, we would love for you to be a part of that Thanksgiving episode.
Yes, and that would be so we've already had Curly in this very kitchen, so hey, we got to keep that comedy legacy going.
For sure.
Right? So we are going to forge ahead with the apple griddle cakes, even though apparently Lou didn't make them. But what can you do? What can you do?
It sounds really good. So
good. So we're just going to kind of go with it. So let me see here what it says to do. We are using a flat griddle that, by the way, I have to do a major shout out to Rick's wife, Patty. She has helped get this whole beautiful kitchen set up for us. She did the food processor thing to chop up all the apples. So Patty has really been like an MVP. Is that what you call it?
Yeah.
MVP or
MVP.
MVP on this episode. So thank you so much, Patty. Okay, so I lost my place in the book. Darn it. Okay. All right, here we go. We are going to half this recipe, by the way, because apparently it makes 24 griddle cakes, and Rick and I cannot eat 12 a piece. That's kind of asking a lot. So we are going to make half this recipe. So it calls for 2 cups of sifted all-purpose flour. We're going to use 1. So I've got our 1 cup right here. It calls for 1 teaspoon of salt, which I've already added. All right. It calls for 3 eggs. We're going to use 1, at least for now. So we're going to add the flour and the salt to the unbeaten eggs, or the beaten egg. Okay, we need, let's see. Hang on. Okay, 3 teaspoons of baking powder. So I'm going to get my baking powder right here. Instead of 3 teaspoons, that means I guess 1.5, since we're cutting this recipe down. Okay, so we've got the baking powder, we've got the flour, we've got the sugar. We need to add the butter. So we used some stick butter that we melted in the microwave. And again, it called for, let's see, 3 teaspoons. We went with 1.5. So we're going to add the butter right here. Okay. Right, so we've got the flour, the salt, 1 tablespoon of sugar. Let's add our tablespoon of sugar.
It's pretty clumpy. Is there any more liquid going into this?
We don't need another egg, Rick, to go into that. That's kind of what I'm thinking. Okay, let's see here. All right. 1 tablespoon of sugar. Okay, we're going to do about a 1/2 tablespoon of sugar. Okay, we're going to add this to the mix. Yeah, it's, even though we have to, it's pretty clumpy. It's not really, yeah, it's pretty clumpy. So I'm thinking maybe we stop the whisk thing and try another egg in here. Very, very clumpy, very clumpy. I'm having trouble getting the clumps out of the whisk. Okay, there we go. There we go. Okay, we're gonna add another egg here. Thank you so much. And I think that's going to make a big difference to this, this mix. All right, so we've got the butter, we've got the egg. Do we have milk?
We do.
Okay, can we add a little bit of milk? Because it does call for 1 1/3 cups, but I'm thinking we're going to half that. So what is half of 1 1/3? I'm horrible at math.
It's this much.
It's this much. Okay, there we go. There we go. Added the milk. Okay, and I will post this recipe, so if anybody wants to try it.
Yeah, that.
Okay, the milk is really helping get the clumps out of this, which is great. Still kind of clumpy though. I'm gonna have to really stir this.
Maybe the whisk will help.
Yeah, let's try the whisk again. See if that helps with the clumping issue.
Yeah, that.
Oh, okay, very good. Is the griddle fired up here?
Sure is.
All right. Rick's kitchen is so perfect for cooking. It is huge and it's got this great island. So it is such a luxury to cook in such a space.
It is helping, but there's a little clumpiness, but I think it'll be fine.
All right. And then, okay, so we've got the flour, the salt, the sugar, the baking powder, the eggs, the milk, the butter. Now we add the apples. And we had to very finely chop these apples. Patty did for us in a food processor, because of course they're going into batter. So we've got to make sure that they are very, very tiny in size. Okay, let's see how that turns out for us.
Yeah, pretty good.
Yeah, that milk really helped kind of get those extra lumps out, or helped add a lot to it. Okay. Now I guess we will get a spoon and start to spoon it onto the griddle. Okay, fingers crossed, guys. Let's see how this goes. But I should be singing or making noises like Curly did while he was cooking. What would Lou sing or say while if he had cooked? What would you think?
He would just trip over the cord.
It's kind of fun when you cook a comedy star's recipe, or that's attributed to them anyway, because I feel like if I screw up really badly, it's funny, right? That we're comedians. It's cool if I mess up, and kind of goes with the vibe. All right. By the way, I will clean up any mess I have made, so don't worry. All right. Well, I think 6 is a good number to start out with here. Good. That's pretty good.
Oh, and it's actually picking up nicely on camera.
Yes, it is. So that's a good thing too. Okay, should we turn up the heat on the griddle a little bit, or do you think
I did that.
Okay.
So
very good.
A minute or so, we should be able to flip.
Yes. So I guess let's go ahead and get into our conversation, because I have so many things I'm eager to ask you and talk to you about today. How did you first find out about Abbott and Costello? What was your discovery?
Okay, so this is a long answer, so I'm going to hand you the spatula.
Excellent. Okay.
Boy, what I have a mentor, a collector mentor. Back when I was growing up in Lyndhurst, Ohio, his name was Kerry, and I met him in junior high school, went to hang out at his house, and he had a picture of the Wolfman, Lon Chaney Jr. on his wall, a poster, and Dracula. And I'm like, this stuff's so cool. And he had some Castle films, the little silent 8mm, 12-minute abridgments with titles at the bottom, no sound. So this was around 1971 or two, long before VCRs and home video. And I just thought it was so cool that you could fire up a movie projector and watch 12 minutes from a horror film. Right around that time, my dad brought home our first Super 8 projector. He got me Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. So I had grown up watching Abbott and Costello movies in Cleveland. They were on Channel 8, WJW TV, and they had a Sunday Abbott and Costello theater. Oh, it's working.
I was kind of a little skeptical at first, but
and they didn't run Laurel and Hardy at that time. They ran the Three Stooges and Little Rascals shorts. So we would race home from school, watch Dark Shadows, and then watch Little Rascals and Three Stooges films. Those look really good.
Yeah, I actually.
We might need maple syrup to go with this. Sure. All right. So I loved all those films and started collecting Castle films, and then I learned about Black Hawk and started collecting Chaplin and Laurel and Hardy. But being a monster kid, someone who loved the Universal horror films, that, of course, leads right into Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein, meet the Mummy, meet Jekyll and Hyde, and so on. So I loved all those films. It was Bela Lugosi and Glenn Strange and Chaney. I mean, they were in those movies. They made 2 films with Boris Karloff. So I went from loving all that stuff to Laurel and Hardy and Chaplin and classic comedy and so on. So that's kind of my long answer of what led me into Abbott and Costello, and then started collecting Martin and Lewis material, which was my first book in this marketing series, and then Abbott and Costello as well. The Laurel and Hardy stuff, even back then, was pretty expensive, and I couldn't afford it, but I could afford Dean and Jerry and Bud and Lou material, and you'll see a lot of that collection when we shift after the cooking to the setup that I've gotten. We get more into the book.
Okay, well, I'm going to flip these again, Rick. Let's see. I don't want to leave them on the griddle too long, lest they get kind of overcooked or tough, but we can turn off the griddle now. I think these are,
Okay.
I think these are good.
And I found the maple syrup.
All right, well, put these on a plate here. And I want to show the audience what they look like. Okay. Guys, 1949 apple griddle cakes. I think these look nice and pretty.
Grab some butter.
I don't want to eat them at the table with all your memorabilia on it, though. So I wonder if we should just stand here and take a taste.
That sounds good.
Okay. Well, these were fast to make. They were easy to make. And let's see.
Over there.
We got a knife. Okay, we're about to taste. Hang on a second. See the steam rising up from it. Ah, very cool. Okay. Right. I always just put butter on mine. I don't put syrup until
you
the
don't?
end. I'm a
Okay.
little quirky like that. I kind of save syrup for like the last part of my pancake breakfast. Okay, shall we? All right, I think we should make a pancake toast here, not only to Lou Costello and Bud Abbott, but also the 100th episode of Hollywood Kitchen. So Rick?
Oh, say that again. The 100th episode of?
100th episode of Hollywood Kitchen. Okay.
I'm almost ready.
All right. A pancake toast.
Hooray!
Hooray. Really good. Hot, but
very tasty.
oh my gosh.
But very.
Wow. I love that Patty picked up Granny Smith apples because they kind of have a
Perfect.
tartness.
Mhm.
They're so good for cooking. Oh my gosh. I may just be in the corner eating a lot of pancakes while you show us memorabilia. I tell you what, I'm going to take this on my lap and just sit it over here. All right. Well, this is good. This is really, really a good recipe. We like it very much. Even if Lou did not make it or eat it, it was attributed to him, and we're just going to kind of enjoy it that way. So we're going to move the computer to the other side of the room, and we're going to look at Rick's incredible memorabilia collection and start our deep dive into Abbott and Costello. So give me just a minute. These are so good, Rick. Oh my gosh.
A winner.
A winner, exceeding my expectations.
If Lou had tasted them, I think he would have liked them.
I think so too. I think that's a totally fair assessment. Okay. It is memorabilia and discussion time.
It works.
Excellent. Okay.
My
so
stuff.
When did you first start collecting on Abbott and Costello, Rick?
I'm going to say that I was probably 13 or 14 years old.
Okay.
And it started with the Castle film 8mm abridgments that were in every camera shop. That's 16mm, which came first, and then there's an 8mm of Ride 'em Cowboy. Castle Films made a fortune off of Abbott and Costello and the Universal horror films in the late 40s and throughout the 50s, 60s into the 70s. And in fact, in the early 50s, Lou's manager was walking in Hollywood and saw a display of these 16mm films in the window. And he was not too happy because they were selling these abridgments without their knowledge or permission. And Universal at the time was trying to re-sign them for another batch of films. So they used, they filed a lawsuit, Sherwin, their manager, and it was quickly settled. And they, from that point on, got royalties or a piece of the pie for using the film clips. And the film that they made next was Lost in Alaska. So this was right around 1952, I think.
Okay. One of the things that when I was prepping this episode, I've thought about it. You and I have talked and done episodes about Laurel and Hardy and the Three Stooges and Martin and Lewis. And what makes a comedy team come together? What makes them funny together? What makes them work when other ones maybe do not? How do they realize they have that magic? And then how do they keep it going? I know that's a hugely loaded question.
It's a huge question. And it's, to some degree, comedy is difficult to analyze, to understand the mechanics of. If you're a Lou Costello, a Stan Laurel, a Jerry Lewis, it's what you live and breathe. I think the audience reaction, because not Laurel and Hardy, but Martin and Lewis and Abbott and Costello started on stage and came together on stage, and the audience reaction told them, oh, we've got something here. Bud Abbott was in show business for over a decade before he met Lou Costello. Lou grew up knowing funny was in his bones, and that's what he needed to do. And he was partnered with folks that didn't quite get him, that it didn't quite mesh. So when he and Bud came together, they knew immediately, this is a match made in heaven. We need to follow this through and see what happens. And with Abbott and Costello's career was very interesting because they started in the early 30s in burlesque. Vaudeville had transitioned into burlesque at this time. The movies was the main entertainment medium at that point. Burlesque was kind of, the writing was on the wall. There were hundreds of comedy teams doing the old routines, but Abbott and Costello had a secret weapon. His name was John Grant. He was their writer. And he would take these routines, dust them off, polish them up, tailor them for the Bud and Lou. You're just loving those pancakes.
The whole
Mine's sitting on a plate back here, cooling off. And he would insert the routines into a radio script, a film script. So when Abbott and Costello came together, the smartest thing they did was hire John Grant. Almost, I call him the fifth Beatle of Abbott and Costello. He was that critical to their success. So they went from being big in burlesque to landing a gig in a Broadway show, The Streets of Paris, which led to radio guest spots with Kate Smith and with Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy, which led to their own radio series in 1942. And that, of course, led to Universal sitting up, taking notice, signing them to be in 2 movies. And the first film they were in, One Night in the Tropics, was not a great movie, but Abbott and Costello stole the show, and Universal quickly signed them for 2 additional films, the first of which was Buck Privates, which changed comedy history. But this is funny, and this is in my book, which is called Advertising Anarchy, and it just came out yesterday, so I don't even have a copy of it yet, and it's not quite yet up on Amazon. So if you're interested in it, please do check in the next day or 2. It will be up on Amazon by then. Anyways, this is in the book. I got the original 1940 press book for One Night in the Tropics, and Universal didn't even know which one was which. They have pictures of Bud and Lou and the wrong names under each of them. They didn't know Abbott from Costello. So a few months later, they're making and releasing Buck Privates, which was their biggest box office sensation of their entire careers. Right place, right time, right mood of the country. And we transitioned from the gentle, slower pace of the Laurel and Hardy films. Chaplin was pretty much done by then. And Bud and Lou's comedy was louder, brasher, faster. It was just what America, just what the world needed in 1941. And it's interesting because they made 3 service comedies, Buck Privates, In the Navy, and
Keep 'em flying.
Thank you. And all 3 of those were filmed and released before December 7th, 1941. So everyone thinks of them as the flag-waving, patriotic Abbott and Costello films that got people to enlist and so on, which they did, but none of them came out after we were actually in the war. But it's kind of interesting.
One of the things that I think is so fascinating about your books is the historic context you place these stars in, because of course, as we know, things don't happen in a vacuum. There's so many economic, social, political issues going on in the world that fuel the rise or the fall of certain stars, certain kinds of movies, certain cycles of film. And you're right, Abbott and Costello are the right person, the right time, the right place. And we talked about Martin and Lewis. Again, they also benefited from the time they were in.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm glad you noticed that.
Yeah.
My books are a little bit different than what is out there. It's not the films of Abbott and Costello. It's not the films of Martin and Lewis. Those books have been written beautifully by other people. So while I do go into some of the plots and some of the behind the scenes stuff, the main focus is how were these comedy teams marketed to the American public in their era. So the Martin and Lewis book, which for Abbott and Costello, it's the same basic layout and setup, just with Martin and Lewis, they only made 16 films. Abbott and Costello made 36 films, almost triple. So as you can see in Marketing Mayhem, which is the first book in the marketing series, and the 3rd and 4th books are going to be a 2-volume Laurel and Hardy set that will come out next year or the year after.
Well, I got more recipes, so
Perfect.
yeah.
So, but you can see with Martin and Lewis, it's it's the lobby cards, it's the publicity stills, all the press book advertising that, most of this stuff hasn't been seen in 60, 70 years. Just really cool looking stuff. And that unless you're a press book collector, you haven't seen this. But the books are in full color now. Abbott and Costello coming out right out of the gate in full color with Martin and Lewis. This is kind of a story. The first edition came out as a black and white book because my publisher didn't have color available. And it wasn't quite my hope for that book.
Vision.
The one sheets are so beautiful, the lobby cards. But then there's over 1,000 images in both of these books. Because they're all most books these days are print on demand, unless you're John Grisham and Stephen King. They get printed up when you place the order. Sometimes Amazon will have 5 or 6 on the shelf, like they had a bunch of marketing mayhems because it sold very well. But what we found was there was such a saturation of ink on the paper that Amazon went back to Bear Manor, my publisher, and said, you have to upgrade the paper. We can't print this book as it's set up now because of the ink. And so that's when my publisher said, yeah, your $50 books are now going to be $100. I said, well, can I at least give them color now? Oh, sure. I wish I knew that. Because I literally wrote this book twice because we had to do the color edition. So now there is no black and white edition. There's only the full color Marketing Mayhem. And then Advertising Anarchy is not only coming out in color, but I'm not even doing a paperback. Look how thick.
It's a phone book. For those of you who know what phone
that's
books
what
are.
Leonard Maltin said. It resembles the city telephone directory
Of New York.
And he's right. So yeah, paperback, it's too big. So only hardback on Abbott and Costello because it was just a few dollars more. So that's kind of the backstory of it being in color. But I have every one sheet for all 36 of their films in full color. I have lobby cards. I have magazine and comic book covers. I have publicity stills. About 1/3 of the 1,000 images are in full color in both of the books.
And speaking of which, Rick, before we went live, Rick and I were just chatting about the book and about the process. And can you show the audience here the difference between the imagery of how some of these ads looked when they were first published in the newspapers in the 1940s or 50s, and how they look on your book, because this is a major difference here.
Yeah, if you're a collector, you're going to see things, even a hardcore collector, that you've never seen before in the quality that I'm about to show you. So I have helpers and they're digital detectives, and they go back into archives. They find TV guide ads or newspaper advertising from a Colgate Comedy Hour show that Abbott and Costello were on, or a radio appearance. And the way they look in these old digital files is not so great. But I have a secret weapon. Sorry. Mike Rose is his name. He was an ad agency executive and he's retired now. So I send him these crappy looking ads. Hey, can you work your magic on this? Oh, the guy's a genius. Now look at
Seriously.
this. Look at a before and after. That's what it looked like when we plucked it from the archives. And then he will reset the fonts in the exact same font, and he'll digitally clean it up and make it just stunning. Better than it would have looked back then. Look at this. Here's an ad for the Abbott and Costello show. So it's one of their filmed shows that was filmed at the Hal Roach Studios the first season. Look at how that original ad looked in a paper, but how it looks now in my book. Crystal clear and gorgeous. Here's another example. Again, a television appearance. And oh, that original ad just looks awful. Well, we found the original photo. We reset it in the exact font, the exact size, and in a sense recreated the ad for advertising Anarchy. Here's another one, again, their television show. Look at how good the KTTV ad on your right, my left, yes, looks. And the original one over here, which is just newsprinty and doesn't really look great. And then one last one, again, a TV guide ad, which is a market improvement over what we plucked from an archive.
Excellent, Rick. Well, these look fantastic. And there's so much to talk about with them, because another point that we were bringing up before we went on camera here is the idea of a comedy auteur, like a comedian who writes their own material, shapes their own material, and is pretty much in absolute control over their own material. Talk about where or where not maybe Abbott will fit into the comedy auteur.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point, Carrie, and it ties into personal feelings. As a teenager, I loved Laurel and Hardy. I loved Martin and Lewis, who were more from my era. And Abbott and Costello, well, they met the monsters, and Who's on First is awesome. But the love, it was different. And I tried to analyze, well, why is that? And I think for me personally, Stan Laurel, Chaplin, Keaton, Jerry Lewis, Woody Allen, they created their cinema characters and wrote their own material, directed themselves, whether they were credited or not. And I'm just drawn to the creators of comedy. Abbott and Costello didn't write anything, didn't create screen characters. They were a burlesque straight man and a comic doing routines that other people wrote. So why do I love them with the same passion that I reserve for Laurel and Hardy and so on? Well, a big reason is Lou Costello was and is a great comic genius. He walked into a room funny. One of my problems with Dance With Me, Henry, their very last film, which isn't even a comedy, is it starts with Lou Costello running down a street towards an orphanage, and he doesn't take a pratfall. He doesn't bump into anybody. He doesn't make a single funny noise. That's not Lou Costello. That's a character he is playing in that movie, which is a comic drama, not an Abbott and Costello comedy. So, I'm bouncing all over the place answering your question. But yeah, I think it goes back to I'm more in tune with the folks that created their characters that were cinema auteurs, so to speak, where Bud and Lou were hired to perform someone else's script, and Lou wanted to take risks, and Bud's like, no, let's keep doing what we're doing. We're making good money. But Lou had an inventive mind. He could ad lib. He was hilarious doing bits of business. So in a sense, as he's doing those things, he's writing them, he's performing them brilliantly. Bud Abbott was the greatest straight man in show business history. Lou Costello needed that anchor, that performer at his side, whether he was being cranky and slapping him or just keeping him on point. Oliver Hardy was not a straight man. Dean Martin was not a straight man. So those comparisons I don't think are fair. But Bud Abbott, in his own way, was a genius as well.
Let me ask you another question. This is another topic that we've kind of gotten into off camera and on, is the relationship they had off screen. Because as we know, Martin and Lewis, as I call it, spontaneously combusted into existence. But then they kind of spontaneously uncombusted. They fell out. And I think too, when you work with someone and you are joined at the hip with them 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, you're on television, you're in movies, you're in radio, you're in live performance. Eventually, you're going to get tired of each other, maybe get on each other's nerves. There's going to be creative differences, as we've seen with multiple comedy partnerships. So how did Bud Abbott and Lou Costello relate to each other or get along behind the scenes?
There are so many rumors and incorrect stories about feuding and whatnot. Now with Martin and Lewis, they were, especially Jerry, he's a very polarizing figure in film history. You either love him or you hate him. There's no, oh yeah, I kind of like that.
No in between.
No in between with a Jerry Lewis. And it's interesting because Martin and Lewis and Abbott and Costello, both teams broke up within 6 months of each other. Martin and Lewis actually broke up first. Their public personas were so in your face, the media was infatuated with them. There were stories about them breaking up 3 years before they broke up. And when they would feud and they would say this, and it would go back and forth in the media of the time, radio reporting, newspaper reporting, and some television. But when Martin and Lewis broke up, the world knew it and the world mourned. They were incredibly rock star popular. When Abbott and Costello broke up months later, it was almost gentlemanly. It was low key. It was Lou saying to Bud, maybe we should just go our separate ways. And Bud saying, if that's how you want it, Lou. And Lou saying, yeah, that's how I want it. Abbott and Costello broke up, respectful of each other. And while they didn't stay in touch and visit each other on the set or anything like that, when they broke up, that was it. But what a difference between Dean and Jerry, full of angst and anger and raw emotion, and none of that really with Bud and Lou.
Yes, who wrote Who's on First? For those of you who don't know, Who's on First was probably one of the most famous comedy sketches in history.
Which it was never called Who's on First until literally into the late 40s, early 50s. It was called the baseball sketch or the baseball routine. And it had, I don't know who wrote it. It dates back, I think, to the 1920s. Many teams did it, but John Grant adapted it for Abbott and Costello's characters, for their rhythms. They performed it not hundreds, thousands of times before it was ever on the radio or on film in the naughty 90s. That clip of them doing Who's on First in the naughty 90s is run at the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown on a nonstop loop. It's, I think it is the most important comedy, verbal comedy routine of the 20th century. And yeah, I go into all this in the book, but yeah, they made it their own, so much so that in the movie Bud and Lou with Harvey Korman and Buddy Hackett, which is very difficult to sit through. It's very dark. It's based on Bob Thomas's book, which was full of sour grape stories from their old manager. And Harvey Korman, Buddy Hackett, these are world-class comedians. They couldn't get the rhythm of Who's on First correct in that film. When you watch it, it's off, it's wrong, it doesn't work. because it's not Abbott and Costello. Even though it's two actors playing Abbott and Costello, they couldn't get it.
Well, you know what I noticed in watching film in general is that a lot of the stars, be it dancers, singers, or comedians who started in vaudeville, they are razor sharp by the time they get to film, because the vaudeville training was so brutal and so exhaustive that the comedy timing, the moves, every single thing is so finely tuned. And that's something that no matter how great a comedian is, like Harvey Korman, you can't learn without having decades of practice.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like that vaudeville, I'm sure it was a very hard life, but it couldn't have been a better training ground for talent to really perform and develop.
Which there's nothing like that these days.
Not at all.
That there won't be another Abbott and Costello. There won't be another Martin and Lewis. Even with comedy clubs and whatnot, it's not the same. That they'll do a set and then 2 months later do it again. It's not like six a day, 7 days a week, refining, repeating, eliminating, editing. That's a training ground that it doesn't exist.
It doesn't. And another thing I was thinking, I can't think of a modern day comedy team. That just occurred to me. I can't think in 2023 of a comedy team.
When Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder made 3 movies together, something like that, and everyone's like, oh, in the tradition of Abbott and Costello and Laurel and Hardy, but it's not. It's someone else's script. They put them together because they were funny together, but it was for a couple of movies. They're not in this world class, not even close. Martin and Lewis were the last film comedy team, period.
I would have to agree. And we talked about, I want to revisit the importance of some of these films like Keep 'Em Flying, Buck Privates, to the World War II era. They were, as you said, used as kind of morale boosters, used as to kind of rally people to the cause of the war, even though they were technically made before the war. Did they keep them in circulation throughout World War II, I take it?
Absolutely. Buck Privates played and played and played, and a year later you could still see Buck Privates. That didn't happen in the 1940s. It happened if you were Gone with the Wind, but a comedy from Universal playing for a year?
Yeah, that's pretty rare.
Astonishing. Even Laurel and Hardy, hoping to stay relevant in the 40s. Their first film away from the Roach Studios for Fox was Great Guns, which it didn't suit them. It was poorly written and it just didn't work. It wasn't their authentic characters. It's a tough film to sit through. It's like watching the death of the Laurel and Hardy characters, because it didn't get much better after Great Guns for that team in the 40s. But for Abbott and Costello, boy, they never looked back after Buck Privates. And funnily enough, they considered that their first film, so much so that many years later, they would just tell people Buck Privates was our first film. It was their first starring film, but they made One Night in the Tropics. They stole One Night in the Tropics from Bob Cummings and the other people in that film. And there's a snippet of who's on first in that film, an abbreviated version there. They're walking by a taxi cab, a ball game is playing on the radio, and they go into a minute or minute and a half of who's on first, because even then, that's what they were known for. So this book, one of the things that I hope it does is, it even says it on the back cover, Abbott and Costello were so much more than who's on first. And the 720 pages of advertising Anarchy bears that out.
Excellent. Another question that I have for you is that, okay, so in the early 30s, the Universal horror films were my gateway drug into loving films. And I would imagine that even to this day, the Universal monsters are one of their signature intellectual properties. So is with a lot of these monster cycles, the monsters go in and out of favor. So they went from terrifying people in the 1930s to kind of being the butt of jokes later on in some of these comedies. Now, who came up with the idea of, I know, let's put Abbott Costello with Frankenstein, with the Wolfman? Like, where did that idea come from?
It was a game-changing idea.
Yeah.
And the second half of their film careers bear that out. Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, which is the first of that cycle. It changed the course of the kind of movies that they made from then on. It was their second top grossing film of all time, second only to Buck Privates. And boy, Universal had then just transitioned into Universal International, and boy, did they sit up and take notice. The grosses came out while they were shooting Mexican Hayride, a pretty typical Abbott and Costello comedy, and one of the last that they would make like that from then on. And when they met the Invisible Man and Jekyll and Hyde and the Mummy and so on, Lou Costello being terrified on screen is movie magic. And it started with a couple of murder mystery type films like Who Done It from their early career, but him reacting to Dracula, to Frankenstein, to the Invisible Man, that never gets old. It's always hilarious. But because they were at Universal, they had access to Frankenstein, the Mummy, all those guys were studio properties. Yeah. So Laurel and Hardy couldn't meet those folks. Martin and Lewis made one supernatural horror comedy. You know, there's a ghost and a skeleton. It's silly. They didn't have Glenn Strange as the monster. A friend of mine, Sheldon Gleiser, a few years ago was going to do a discussion on, I think it might have been Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, and he emailed me, hey, how many times did Bela Lugosi play Dracula? 4 or 5, right? Because everyone just thinks that, but no. Bela Lugosi played Dracula twice. That's it. In the original in 1931, and in this little gem right here, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein made the world right because, I'm sorry, John Carradine looks like a Shakespearean actor who took a turn into the wrong soundstage. His Dracula has all the menace of a meatball. Bela Lugosi coming back at his age in 1948 and killing it as Dracula with Abbott and Costello, it's movie magic. And I have a lot of their one sheets. I don't have Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. I can't freaking afford it. It goes for tens of thousands of dollars. I'm lucky to have a lobby card from that film. When it comes to collecting Abbott and Costello posters, lobby cards, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein is it. It's the one everybody wants, and it goes for huge amounts of money. It's all covered in the book. Get the book.
Yes, and I want to show up close this lobby card because it's so good.
And I'm actually pretty critical of the Universal marketing team for the way they marketed this film. This lobby card looks pretty good, but most of the posters for Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, the monsters are in the background. In the case of the Wolfman and Dracula, they're like sticking their heads out a window. I mean, they don't focus on a huge draw for the marketing. I think it could have made even more money if they had designed these posters and lobby cards with an eye toward focusing on the monsters, which they didn't. They corrected it with Abbott and Costello Meet the Invisible Man, which was the next one in the series. This is a beautiful one sheet.
Oh,
and
yes,
it appropriately focuses on the Invisible Man hovering above them and menacing them. And the Jekyll and Hyde one sheet, the Mummy one sheet, 3 sheets, they're all fantastically designed. So they learned some lessons from what they didn't do with Meet Frankenstein.
And as you have really made me realize through your work, marketing is kind of critical to the perception of these films and the success of these films, because you can have the greatest movie, but if you're not properly selling it to the intended audience, it's not going to get there.
Exactly. Especially in the late 40s, early 50s, Abbott and Costello are still cranking out 2, sometimes 3 movies a year, and Film Classics and Real Art are reissuing their earlier films in theaters. They hadn't yet been on television. So the newer films all very clearly say all new, telling audiences, yeah, there's a lot of product out there, but you haven't seen this one before. Right here on Go to Mars one sheet, big, can you see? Yeah, you can see it. All new in a little star right on the one sheet. All the posters and press book advertising stress that, no, this is a new film. You can safely pay your money and you'll see something you haven't seen before.
Excellent. And you know what amazes me? I have read the Chris Costello's Liaison First book. Is Lou was kind of struggling with some pretty intense stuff behind the scenes.
Oh gosh, yeah. As much of the drama of the Martin and Lewis partnership, which played out so publicly, Lou was not in good health most of his life. There were 3 extended periods of time where they were off screen for a year, an entire year. And even that was promoted in much of the marketing. First film in a year, back after a year, because rheumatic fever knocked him down for the count for 11 and 12 months at a crack. And the 3rd time that happened just happened to be 51 or so, early 52. Well, that's when Martin and Lewis were exploding. Not a good time for Abbott and Costello to be dormant for an entire year. It hurt them. Their box office was cut in half when they came back. It's just how that all played out. And they were still making some great films. Abbott and Costello Meet the Invisible Man is excellent. So yeah, there was still some great stuff coming from them, especially when they would appear on the Colgate Comedy Hour. So let's talk about television for a moment.
Yes, let's do that. Absolutely.
Both Martin and Lewis and Abbott and Costello, and these are very apt comparisons, came to be on stage in front of live audiences laughing uproariously. So they both had radio shows. For Abbott and Costello, it was the golden age of radio, and their show on NBC and then on ABC. Hugely popular. I think Abbott and Costello's 1940s radio show, especially the NBC era, are right up there with Jack Benny, Burns and Allen, as one of the 5 best comedy shows of old-time radio. But then television comes, and both teams are among the rotating hosts of the Colgate Comedy Hour. Well, if you want to understand why Abbott and Costello were so popular, were so great, why Martin and Lewis were the Beatles of the 1950s in terms of popularity and audience reaction, watch kinescopes of both teams on the Colgate Comedy Hour. They're gut-busting, hilarious, and you get it. That it was event television. And Abbott and Costello's are not quite as good as the Martin and Lewis appearances, but They were so close, it's negligible. I love seeing both of those teams on that program. Now, Abbott and Costello, unlike Martin and Lewis, that was pretty much their main television gig. But Abbott and Costello also filmed, what, 52 episodes, something like that, of their filmed sitcom, The Abbott and Costello Show, which was a very early example of syndicated television. So they sold it directly themselves through their agent and companies that they set up. And that show was 30 minutes rather than the Colgate, which is an hour. It was filmed rather than live television. So they would add a laugh track. They really didn't need to, but that's how TV was presented. And I love the Abbott and Costello Show, the film version, especially the first season, which has Hillary Brooke throughout the whole season. Joe Besser, who I never cared for him as the third stooge for his Three Stooges shorts, but Joe Besser on the Abbott and Costello Show, I fall out of my chair. The guy is a riot playing Stinky, the little kid, with Lou Costello's little kid. The two of them together, comedy gold. But anyways, the Abbott and Costello Show, the first season, was filmed at the Hal Roach Studios on the back lot. There's just a vibe to them. They're almost like two-reelers. I love them, but the Colgate is the way to really understand. Oh, I get it. I get why people love them. Listen to the audience laughing.
Excellent. And I just think they play so well with audiences. I was telling you before we went on camera, I was lucky enough to see Buck Privates at the $1 Million Theater from the Los Angeles Conservancy several years ago. And seeing a packed movie palace with a film like that on a big screen, that is an event. That is an experience. And you can't capture, I mean, you could kind of capture some of the energy of that maybe on TV or radio, but not the same way.
No,
Really.
Seeing these classic films with an audience of a few hundred people, it's different from sitting on the couch in the family den. It's immediate, it's engaging, it's we're all enjoying this together, and boy, are we enjoying it. That's what makes the Sons of the Desert the International Laurel and Hardy organization that I've been a part of since I was 15 years old. And to give you an example of how long ago that was, I founded the Ohio chapter when I was 15 in 1973. I'm going back in a few months for the 50th anniversary of that group, which is still showing films. So the magic of that is the Sons of the Desert still being popular. We have all of that stuff on DVD, on Blu-ray. Seeing it with a like-minded audience, people who want to be there and have paid their money to be in that crowd, there's nothing like it. The laughter gets contagious. There's a letter in my book, Advertising Anarchy, in the television section from a fan magazine where this gal's writing a letter, an open letter to Bud and Lou. And she's saying, yeah, I'm not a big comedy person. I like dramas and Clark Gable and whatnot. So I never really went to Abbott and Costello movies, but I found myself at one of your movies recently, Mexican Hayride, one of the good ones, but not one of the all-time greats. And she just says, sitting in that audience, I was taken by how much they were laughing at your antics. And suddenly I found myself laughing. I wasn't laughing because they were laughing. I was laughing because you two are really funny. And I'm now an Abbott and Costello fan. And it's just because she was in an unwilling member of an audience who were laughing uproariously. And at first she just laughed because everybody was. But then, oh, wait a minute. They're really good. I'm going to see more of their movie. It's magic.
And comedy is so important too, because the famous saying, dying is easy, comedy is hard. I believe that wholeheartedly, because I just the other night rewatched again Sullivan's Travels, and the Joe McCrea character he's a comedy guy, but he wants to make this dramatic film. But in the end, when he sees people going through this horrible time and they're laughing at a comedy, and he kind of realizes the weight that comedy can carry in the world, and how you can be in the hospital, you can be going through horrible times, and there is just nothing like laughter for the human soul.
So true. I even wrap up the book on the last page in a very sentimental with a very sentimental perspective, talking on that exact point that here we are, we're in the 21st century. There's nuts stuff going on out there every single day.
Oh yeah.
Full of angst, full of drama.
Anger.
We don't know what's going to happen. But we can sit in front of the tube or the screen. It's not a tube anymore. And watch Keep 'Em Flying or almost any of them. And forget about your troubles, about the mortgage, about what's Russia's going to do, and lose yourself in timeless classic comedy. That is Abbott and Costello's legacy. I do get a little sentimental at the end, summing it all up, but boy, that's it. Here we are, deep into the 21st century, and we can watch Laurel and Hardy, Abbott and Costello, Martin and Lewis, and forget what's happening and just laugh ourselves silly.
I agree. That feels like such a good note to end on, but I still have more I'm going to talk about. So.
Well, yeah, where are you at now? Oh my gosh, yep, it's been over an hour.
Guests can't make it, so we'll talk more about that later. But another thing, I was just kind of looking at your collection here. I noticed an unlikely thing, a oil filter ad for Abbott and Costello. I got to be honest, that's not something I expected to run across in your collection, but yet maybe it shows how ubiquitous they were in everyday American life. Maybe
anything to promote their current product. That ad came out when their film Coming Round the Mountain was about to be released by Universal International. So do they really use Purolator oil filters on their cars? Probably not. Even if they did, they wouldn't know it because someone would take care of that for them.
Like someone cooks Lou's meals. Lou's is not making his own pancakes.
But if they're in duotone color and it promotes Coming Round the Mountain, and a few extra folks were aware of the film because it was in an oil filter ad, so be it.
Another thing I wanted to ask you about, this is catching my eye right here, this beautiful comic. Is it a comic? What would you call it?
It is. That was in the Sunday, and if you flip it around, there's another one. Feg Murray would do a weekly comic strip with little facts and stories about the film stars. And boy, did he draw Abbott and Costello beautifully.
Right.
So yeah, that would be in the Sunday pages with Crazy Cat and the strips of the day. That was a little bit before Pogo and Peanuts, my all-time favorites. But Buck Rogers and so on would be next to it. And people would read little stories of the movie stars, little believe it or not things.
Wow. And then another thing I'm noticing just looking at your collection is you're right about the color, because these colors are so vibrant on all of these items. And it's amazing how so many decades later, these colors have not faded at all. They still look incredibly beautiful.
Well, I keep them in my temperature controlled archive.
Well, this is true. And also another thing I noticed too is how Abbott and Costello, they segued into every genre. Like we've got, let's see, a French Legion movie that they made.
The Foreign Legion, yep.
Yes, we've got this?
A beautiful multimedia piece with cutout construction paper and airbrush that was promoting Rio Rita, their first of 3 MGM films. And the guy who made this, Jacques Kapralik, was interestingly also hired by Universal to do line art for Little Giant, and by United Artists to do another cutout piece like this for Africa Screams. So he was so good that 3 different studios hired him, bless you, to do ad art for 3 different films.
But it's amazing how they did a French Legion movie. They did a space comedy. They did horror comedies. They did Western comedies. Like, they kind of did a comedy in so many different genres, which is really interesting.
I think their second best film, Abbott and Costello Meets Frankenstein, the best thing they ever did. But I think their second best film is The Wistful Widow of Wagon Gap, which is the Western that you're referring to. Here's an insert card for that movie.
Oh, I love the art on that.
And Laurel and Hardy's second best film was also a Western, Way Out West.
And you have lots of lobby cards, because I pick up this lobby card and I can feel that there's a ton of other stuff in here.
Yep, lobby cards came out in sets of 8. Not Martin and Lewis, but Abbott and Costello always had a title card, so that's the one on top, and then 7 scene cards. And they would come in a little paper sleeve.
Oh, wow.
So that's the original Buck Privates Come Home sleeve that the 8 lobby cards originally came in. So you've got the title card, but then 7 scene cards. And by the way, Buck Privates Come Home is the only direct sequel that Abbott and Costello ever made, reprising their characters from Buck Privates, and even bringing the Sergeant Collins, Nat Pendleton, along to reprise his role in the sequel, which was 6-7 years after the original and after the war ended.
All right, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about another thing I'm noticing on your table. What is Lou Jokes? Is this a bathroom joke magazine?
Oh, no, not at all.
This
is, see, Martin and Lewis were on hundreds and hundreds of covers of magazines in the 50s. Abbott and Costello, much, much less. But this publication is called 1,000 Jokes.
Oh, I thought it said Lou.
No, it's 1,000 Jokes. And Abbott and Costello were on the cover 3 or 4 times in the 40s. Laurel and Hardy were on the cover in 1934 when Babes in Toyland came out. Martin and Lewis, and then solo Dean and Jerry covers into the early 70s. This publication ran from the early 30s to the early 70s. Every month, 1,000 more jokes.
I guess it was covering up one of the O's, and I just thought it said Lou. So
No.
that is so funny. Oh my gosh. And go into details about this. I love this still here, by the way. It's a 1953 film. And tell me which film this is from. I can't remember.
That's Abbott and Costello Go to Mars, which
space film.
In the 70s, it was in that book by Medved, which was the worst turkeys of all time. And this was at that time called Abbott and Costello's worst film. It is not. There's half a dozen films under this one. I've always had a soft spot for it because of the science fiction angle, but they do not go to Mars. They go to Venus. So totally misleading.
So they did Westerns, they did horror, they did sci-fi, they did just
war,
movies.
military.
Yeah, so they really made it to not every, but a heck of a lot of genres.
But they would steal material from those that came before them, and those that came after them stole material from them. There's a lot in Abbott and Costello that is taken from Three Stooges shorts. Violent in the word is the word for curly, which is my favorite Stooge short, is totally the basis for their college comedy. Here Come the Co-eds. The plots are alarmingly similar, and a lot of the routines with the oyster squirting into Lou was something Curly had done earlier and would do later. So that there are like movies with funny boxing matches. So I mean, Chaplin did it, Laurel and Hardy did it, Harold Lloyd, Keaton, they all had boxing movies. But when Abbott and Costello did it, they added the Invisible Man. So there's an invisible boxer in the ring with Lou pretending to box. I mean, that's a brilliant twist. It's literally the highlight of that movie, this boxing match. Well, that's not stealing, really. It's a not a genre, but a method of doing comedy, the boxing comedy. But their twist is brilliant. And then Jerry Lewis did his own in Sailor Beware, and he went back. There's no Invisible Man in his, but he's still wildly funny running around that boxing ring. So yeah, they would think up, well, what genre can we turn on its ear in the next one? And when Frankenstein came out, Lou hated that script. He just thought, why are we doing this? It's going to be awful. My kid could write a better script than this one. And in the 21st century, that's on the AFI's list of the 100 greatest comedies of all time. No other Abbott and Costello is on that list. It's considered their masterpiece, and it is.
Well, why don't we check the phone here and see what kind of comments we're getting from some of the viewers. So let's do that.
While you're doing that, I'm going to grab another issue of 1000 Jokes to show you what I'm at.
Sure. Okay, let me see what comes up when we look at the comments. So we've got 78 comments here. So let's see what we got. Oh, come on, phone, please.
So first, here's an issue of Movie Life with a really nice color photo of Bud and Lou in their first Western, which wasn't a period Western like Wistful Widow was, Ride 'em Cowboy. But here's that 1934 issue of 1000 Jokes when Babes in Toyland first came out with Laurel and Hardy on the cover.
So Leslie Apple is saying, I grew up watching Abbott and Costello on TV. They were staples of Saturday afternoon TV in those days. Loved them with Frankenstein, Dracula, Wolfman, plus Hold That Ghost. Krista Lawler. Hey, Krista. Krista is saying, I exposed my child to Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein on Svengoolie. She adored it. Mother of the Year. That is parenting done right, Krista. Parenting done right. Okay, let's see. Okay. Did you meet any of their family or ask them what they thought about the book? That's from Monique.
Great question. When I did the Martin and Lewis book, I reached out to Dean's daughter, Deanna. Never heard from her to this day. Haven't heard from her. I did reach out to Chris Costello. Chris has been very gracious. She's excited about my book. When they do a monthly Abbott and Costello digital newsletter, and I'll be spotlighted in this issue that's coming out in July, tying into the release date of the book. There's an Abbott and Costello display coming up at the Hollywood Museum about a month from now, towards the end of July, and Chris is very involved in that. I have 12 framed one sheets in that exhibit. and a bunch of lobby cards and other stuff, but obviously not everything because I have all this stuff.
Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Are you going to do any guided tours of that Hollywood Museum exhibit? Like, are you going to be down there for any events? Because I'm thinking it might be cool to do a little Hollywood Kitchen meetup, and maybe we could go down there, see you, and see the exhibit.
Oh, that would be cool to do, and we should. I will be there for the opening of the exhibit because so much of it came from my collection. But other than being there, and hopefully they'll let me set up a little table and I'll have some books for sale. I won't be touring around. However, I'm excited to go. Chris Costello will be there. I know Bob Satterfield is hoping to get a few of the other co-stars that are still around, a half a dozen of which I interviewed for my book as well. So there's some interesting folks that worked with Bud and Lou that are still with us that we hope will be there for the opening of the exhibit as well. I think it's right around July 25th. It's a Wednesday or Thursday. So just about a month from now.
Okay. Another comment, Bill Graff says, I remember Al Lewis said that in burlesque, the routines were not written down. They were, quote, worked out. And when Al did an episode of Lost in Space, he ended up doing a burlesque bit to pad the show.
And that's why I never cared for Lost in Space. I was always a Star Trek guy. No, that they were written. That said, each team or each group that would perform the sketches would change it up and tweak it to fit whatever their stage characters might have been at the time. But no, there were writers that would devise the original scripts and the teams would learn them. But performing Who's on First 1,000 times, you don't need a script. It's in there. And
Bill Graff is saying, I have a question. Is there an official fan club for Bud and Lou like Sons of the Desert?
There's nothing quite like Sons of the Desert, which is a very in-person, let's have regional meetings and screen films together as a group, and we have a convention every other summer and so on. Nothing quite like that for any of the comedy teams. There's a huge Three Stooges group, and they've met a few times, but not like Sons of the Desert. For Abbott Costello, absolutely. Chris Costello keeps her father's legacy very well alive and burning. They do a monthly newsletter, and she's constantly answering questions on Facebook and so on. This is a woman who has her own career. She's a travel agent, but makes the time because her family legacy is critically important to her. And it was great to hear from Chris and that she's so interested in my book.
Excellent. Well, I'm so grateful to Bob Satterfield, major shout out to Bob Satterfield, who introduced me to you because
True.
I met you when I was early in the Hollywood Kitchen days. I wanted to do an Oliver Hardy episode, and I asked Bob Satterfield to be my guest. He's very involved in the Laurel and Hardy community. I've given him a cemetery tour. He's a kind of a cemetery person like I am. And I said, I would like you to do the Hollywood Kitchen show. And he said, I'm not really that into being on camera, but you know who you should talk to? My friend Rick Greene. He is great. And I reached out to you, and boy, am I glad I did, because you are the film history gift that will never stop giving. I've said it before. I'll say it a million times. You are so generous with your knowledge, your research.
And my kitchen.
And your kitchen. Oh my gosh, your kitchen is amazing. So yeah, I mean, I am looking forward to reading this book cover to cover, and I'm looking forward to more that you have in store for us.
Well, we will do a Thanksgiving episode with Chris Costello sharing the stuffing recipe. And my next project is a double volume Laurel and Hardy set. I promised my publisher no more 700-page books. So I'm going to do 2 500-page books on Laurel and Hardy, and that will be coming in a year or a year and a half, something like that.
And I guess it's time to wrap up, but I just wanted to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you to everybody who has watched Hollywood Kitchen, who has written me. People have sent me cookbooks and even kitchen supplies, which is so generous. I have a Patreon, I have a Buy Me a Coffee account. Any donations to that go toward buying groceries, testing recipes, etc. And I'm just so grateful to all of you because I started this project at a really, really dark time in the world during lockdown. And it's kind of given me a lot of joy. It's made me have something fun to look forward to. I've made new friends. I've engaged with tons of different historians and colleagues. And I've learned how to make some food, which is actually a lot of it's really good. So I just couldn't be more grateful. And I'm grateful to all of you who've watched and all of you who've said nice things. I can't really tell you how much I appreciate that. So thank you.
From the heart, and she means every word. We're thrilled to share the memorabilia, the stories, the memories. Whenever Carrie needs me, I'm here. And let us end with a close-up of my Lou Costello autograph photo from Lost in a Harem, a vintage 1940s print, and he signed it up there in the corner.
You probably can't see the signature, but I can definitely verify Chris Costello is totally right. The signature in that cookbook was not at all accurate. So now we know. Now we know. But guys, thank you, Rick, so much. Thank you, Lou. And thank you all for joining us. And please stay tuned for more food, fun, and film history from Hollywood Kitchen.
Bye-bye.